Oh, there we go. Let me make this so it's working right. There we go. Oh, that's still kind of far. Okay, here we go. Oop, it is bright out here. We are starting a new book. It is Oliver Twist. It is by Charles Dickens. Chapter 1: Birth and Early Childhood of Oliver Twist. Among other public buildings in a certain town in England, there was a workhouse, a place for poor people who had no homes. It was here that Oliver Twist was born. The only people who attended to his mother during Oliver's birth were a poor old woman nurse who worked in the workhouse and the parish surgeon. As Oliver gave his first cry and moved, the patchwork coverlet carelessly flung over him, the iron bedstead rustled. Hearing this, Oliver's mother, a feeble young woman, uttered in a faint voice, "Let me see the child and die." Sorry, George, this is another story where someone dies. "Oh, you must not talk of dying yet," said the surgeon in a kind voice. The mother stretched out her weak hands towards the child. As the surgeon put the newborn in her frail arms, she affectionately imprinted her cold white lips on the infant's forehead, passed her hands delicately over his face, shuddered, fell back, and died. "It's all over, Mrs. Thingummy," said the surgeon. "She was a good-looking girl. From where did she come?" The old nurse replied, "She was brought here last night by the overseer's order. She was found lying in the street. Nobody knows where she came from or where she was going to." The surgeon leaned over the body and raised his left hand. "No wedding ring, I see," he said, and bid the nurse good night. Oliver cried out loudly. If he had known he was an orphan with no parents, left at the mercy of the churchwardens, perhaps he would have cried even louder. The parish authorities decided that he should be sent to the branch workhouse a few miles away, where poor orphans and juvenile offenders were looked after by Mrs. Mann, a hard lady who ill-clothed the children and gave them very little food to eat. Naturally, the children were weak and frail. Oliver Twist, even on his ninth birthday, was a weak, thin child. He spent his ninth birthday locked in the coal cellar with two other boys because they had complained, because they were hungry. On the same day, Mr. Bumble, who worked at the main workhouse, came visiting the branch workhouse. He proclaimed to Mrs. Mann that he had come over to discuss Oliver and decide his future for him. And notwithstanding an offered reward of £10, which was afterwards increased to £20, said Bumble, "we have never been able to discover who is his father, or what was his mother's settlement, name, or condition." Mrs. Mann raised her hands in astonishment, but added after a moment's reflection, "How does he have any name at all, then?" "We name our babies in alphabetical order. The last one was Swubble, so this one had to start with a T, and I named him Twist," replied Mr. Bumble, glowing with pride at his own cleverness. Mr. Bumble then announced that the parish board had decided that Oliver was too old to be there any longer, and he should leave the house. "Will you go along with me, Oliver?" said Mr. Bumble in a majestic voice. Angry about losing a child and thus some money that was paid as his allowance to her, Mrs. Mann furiously raised her fist and shook it from behind Mr. Bumble's chair, showing her displeasure. Oliver saw Mrs. Mann's gestures, but he had to go anyway. Even though he had never received any kindness in word or deed from Mrs. Mann, he felt a tinge of sorrow as he had to leave the only friends that he had ever known, his fellow mates in the workhouse. Now he felt lonely, and he was venturing into the wide, unknown world. On reaching the parish, Mr. Bumble told Oliver that he had to appear before the parish board. It was a large, whitewashed room where 8 or 10 fat gentlemen sat around a table. On the high armchair above the rest sat Mr. Limbkins, the head of the parish board. The board decided that as Oliver had no father or mother, he should be taught a useful trade. "So you will begin to pick oakum tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock," added the surly one in his white waistcoat. After this, Oliver was sent to a large ward where he sobbed himself to sleep on a rough, hard bed. He had not had a happy day in the 9 years of his life. The room where the boys were fed was a large stone hall. A fat master dressed in an apron ladled the gruel at meal times. He was often assisted by two other women. The boys were served oatmeal gruel in bowls that never needed washing, as the boys polished them with their spoons. Oliver and his companions suffered the tortures of slow starvation. At last, after 3 months, they grew wild with hunger. They held a meeting about who should walk up to the master and ask for more gruel, and the task fell onto Oliver. One day at mealtime, as the boys whispered and winked at Oliver, he rose from the table, went up to the master, and said, "Please, sir, I want some more." The master turned pale with astonishment and stared at Oliver. With his ladle raised above his shoulder, the master aimed a blow at Oliver's head and then shrieked for the beadle. I don't know what a beadle is. I'll have to look that up. The parish board was sitting at an important meeting when Mr. Bumble rushed in and uttered breathlessly, "I beg your pardon, sirs. Oliver Twist has asked for more gruel." Mr. Limpkins, the head of the board, I guess it's the board, was taken back to hear that the boy had asked for more, even after having his share. He was horrified at the boy's audacity. How can an orphan ever dare to ask for more? He should be hanged, Mr. Limpkins suggested. After a long and loud discussion, it was concluded that Oliver would be locked up in a dark room, and a bill was posted outside the gate announcing a reward of £5 to anybody who would be willing to take Oliver and free the parish of the responsibility of the boy. And that is the end of chapter 1 in Oliver Twist. Oops.